Hey, we're going to play a game called NBA What Ifs. This was your idea. If the regular season does get canceled, and if everything gets canceled. So we're going worst case scenario. This goes a few months, and on top of all the other horrible outcomes of that, and how terrible it would be for our economy, and just people going crazy being at home, and 90,000 other things, not to mention the deaths and illnesses and everything else. If this season just went away, what would be some of the what ifs that came out of that? So do you want to go for you? I thought you would do one, then I would do one. We'd go back and forth.
Perfect. The biggest one is the most disappointing team of this season, and that's Philadelphia. And I don't know what you were supposed to expect from this team, not only with Embiid's up and down approach to the game, as much as I love when it's great, and then Simmons dealing with a significant back injury here. And we'd seen different versions of them, the argument of can they play together, can they not? It really just depends. Like, are you a Sixers fan or super into analytics, or do you think that there may be some long-term problems there? And then you add in the Brett Brown factor and just how much of this hasn't fit, and Horford having a bad season. If they had an early exit as a 3-6 matchup, now I still think they may have if they were healthy, I would have picked them against the Celtics in the first round. But let's say it's a disappointing second round exit, which is totally possible, even though I know in a recent pod I talked myself into another version. But that's just them. It's the total unknown. The point of this would be if the season is done and they start new next year, I think Philadelphia doesn't have to answer any of those really tough questions about their coach and roster fit, and they would just run it back looking at this year as an incomplete grade instead of a failure, despite the fact it is a massive disappointment 60 games in.
Well, and then think about some of the people that Kenny Atkinson, John Beilein, like if all of this had happened 3 weeks earlier, those like John Beilein, like let's say this happened right at the All-Star break. He's not getting bought out. Kenny Atkinson, the Nets probably aren't doing anything yet.
No way. You couldn't fire anybody.
No.
You're going to fire somebody? I mean, Beilein apparently gave up money, so that one's like, whoa. I don't know. I imagine Kenny's getting paid.
The Philly thing, who knows? Like they might have had to do something about Brett Brown before they even got to the playoffs. I'm with you. I don't think anything gets solved. And if anything, this amount of time that's passing here will, I think, force a lot of teams to talk themselves into the glass half full part of their situation, right? And not the glass half empty part.
Yeah,
so
because
I'm with you.
Neutral is a positive, right? And most teams end up having a negative result in the playoffs.
My biggest what if, and I actually think this is my number one out of all the ones on my list. So if they cancel this season and it's just gone, it's D-Day, it's the worst case scenario. Now you have the Clippers coming back next year. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard with opt-outs after that year. They've traded 7 first-rounders and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander basically for this 1 year that those guys could opt out of potentially. That trade becomes the all-time sink or swim trade in the history of the league. They make that trade knowing, all right, we at least have 2 years where we're going for the title here and hopefully more. And now one of those years is gone. I mean,
that might be the biggest one. Seriously. Like if it's done and you go, okay, now this year's a tryout to see if these two guys want to stay.
And then the auxiliary piece of that, you have this Clippers franchise that moves from Buffalo in 1978. They're in San Diego 6 years. They come to LA in 1984. They've never made the finals. Ever. This was going to be like the year potentially. This was the year for the LA versus LA and all that stuff. And then potentially a Clippers in the finals situation. And out of all years, this is the year that is in jeopardy. I mean, I talk about like not being able to catch a break. If you're a Clipper fan, black sheep to the Lakers the entire time. You have the worst owner in the history of sports as your owner for 3 solid decades. And then when everything goes right the first time with the Chris Paul and Blake thing, that never happens for a variety of reasons. Now you have this reboot here, and now just the season potentially getting canceled. Unbelievable. What is your next what if?
Houston. I will never believe that Westbrook was a player that Daryl Morey was enamored with. but I understood the transaction, and it was a James Harden Fertitta deal, right? So you factor in that Daryl's always willing to make moves, but I don't even know. Like, what if they got bounced in the first round? There's a chance Houston gets bounced in the first round. The small ball approach was terrific out of the gate for weeks. The Knicks loss, whatever, they were due for a bad one. The Clippers loss, you're like, okay, wait a minute, this makes more sense. And then you start looking at their rebounding numbers and they're getting smashed on the boards. You're like, maybe this is actually tiring everybody out because they don't have a big rotation. Maybe this thing was really exciting and fun and successful, but it's not a long-term ploy. And Westbrook, even though he's putting up major numbers and he's playing better than Harden, he was taking 1 million shots a game because everything was wide open for him. So, like, how sustainable was that? Now, they probably just start next year with it unless there's some big trade waiting for him. And there's really no big trade unless it's one of those two guys. And I can't ever imagine they're trading Harden. And, look, Westbrook has been so good up until this point. I don't even know, like, at least the market would be better for him. But whatever this version of Houston was, you could have seen a coach, a GM, a roster overhaul if they lost in the first round. And now with this, if there's no season, it's likely, like most of these teams that we talk about all the changes they should make, most of them all will just run it back. And there won't be that end unless you think that Houston was going to go to the Western Conference Finals or beyond, which I didn't.
Well, think about that. So when did the season officially, when was the Gobert announcement? That was like March 10th? Something like that? March 11th?
It's a Wednesday, so yeah. What is it, the 22nd now?
Yeah. So March 11th. So they could have potentially lost in round one. That would have been 5 weeks later. And then everybody is getting canned. D'Antoni's gone, Morey's gone, the whole thing. They're just cleaning house, starting over. And now I'm with you. I think not only did they bring it back, they probably would look at the offseason as a chance to say, hey, this style actually works. Let's get better players for that Jeff Green spot. And who are some of the other guys they had? Like Gerald Green, Danielle House.
Gordon was having a rough stretch. And then McLemore, whatever. They obviously just traded for Covington. So I don't really know what the pieces could be around it to add to Westbrook Harden if that's what you wanted to do. But I mean, there's like, you would agree that this is an anti-Houston to say there's a version of this where they lose in the first round here, right? Like that's not.
Oh, yeah.
There's not. I mean, what if they run into the Clippers? Forget it. Denver, who knows? But if it were bad, I think the whole thing would get overhauled. But I don't even know that would mean a Westbrook Harden breakup. But if it were no D'Antoni, if it were no Morey, then I don't think they'd be like, all right, cool, we're going to keep. Like, I would imagine that there'd be a difference of approach here by the staff and their offensive philosophy a little bit.
What's your next what if?
This is a good one. If the season's canceled and they start it up, say at a later date, does this mean no one can write a rest piece about the NBA for 3 years?
It certainly seems like a less pressing issue these days.
Right. Will load management still be defended in some corners as staunchly as it's been defended in the last few years if there's no more season and it looks like they have like 6 months off?
I'm going to say it's going to become less of a topic, would be my guess. So double drafts coming in, I think 2022.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they rolled this draft over. I don't think they would. I think the teams, Golden State, the Knicks, all those things are like, hey, let's do the draft. We're ready for it. We had a shitty season we were due. I have a tiny what if. This was really going to be a great summer for Milwaukee. And I'm aware of this because one of my college roommates, Chip Kane, is from Milwaukee. After college, went back, lives in Milwaukee, raised a family in Milwaukee. And this was like the summer. It was like Giannis is going to make the finals. It's going to be Giannis, LeBron. And then the DNC is coming right after. Milwaukee, we're going to be we're the center of everything. Finals here. All the NBA people are coming. And then the next month, the whole political scene, that's going to be here. It's all coming at Milwaukee. And now both things are going to get canceled, potentially.
Yeah, because Milwaukee, that's the 12th to the 16th, I think, of July. And the only reason I know that is because when I was talking to some league guys, they were like, that's another issue. If Milwaukee were in the, we expect them to do well in the playoffs, you're going to worry about even having a place to play this thing and what you're going to do. Having the political convention in your city, is that a good thing? I get it. It's good for businesses and all that stuff. Did you ever hit up, and it came to Boston when we were younger, right?
I think it's more of a they're Chicago in the shadow of Chicago all the time, and here's this one summer where everything's coming up.
It's a big party,
in
though,
the
right?
News. Yeah,
I just can't imagine going like, "Hey, I'm just going to go get hammered all week with a bunch of people from DC." But I heard it's like nuts. But that's never been on the checklist.
I have another tiny what if. So these count as one. Because these are two mini ones.
Okay.
Do you realize so let's say this regular season's done. Let's just go with that. Curry, Durant, Clay, and Kyrie combined for 25 games. These are 4 of the 15 most famous guys in the league.
Yeah, you could probably go to 11 if you got rid of Kyrie in that, because I don't think Kyrie's a top 10 player. But yeah, 15.
I'm not even saying best player. I'm saying like just most famous people in the league.
Popular, when Kyrie's higher. I don't think you
Yeah.
even have to go all the way to 15. I mean, Kyrie's shoes do great. Kyrie's got a lot of fans, man. So that's
it's just it's a weird outcome of the season. Curry ended up playing 5 games this season.
I know, and it was so much fun to have him back, even in a loss.
And then it never even happened.
Right. Like that was the game where I go, oh my gosh, that's right. Like, and he wasn't even great in it necessarily. He had a couple moments, but I think that also speaks to the depth of the top of this league.
Yeah.
Like this league is so great right now that you cannot have 4 of those guys playing. And yet we still have a bunch of guys that we're arguing about, and the uncertainty. Like that's the real disappointment, is that with a post-Warriors NBA for the first time now here in half a decade, it was this like, who's actually going to really step up? I mean, that's the thing that, if it ends up being just done, that we're denied as much as anything.
Yeah, and you and I both love going to Basketball Reference and checking out the career stuff and things like that. And people just have these weird blip seasons, right? Like MJ had the season, the 85-86 season. I think he played 17 games. Bird had the year, the 88-89 years, 6 games. It's it. It's done. And you're like 82, 80, 79, 86. And somehow Curry ends up playing 5 games. So you have Curry, Clay, and Durant, the heart of this 3-year finals run that the Warriors had, and they play 5 games combined. And that's another thing we should mention for the what if standpoint. If, God forbid, the whole thing gets canceled and we don't even have a playoffs, the Warriors' final streak would still be technically alive. I mean, it's kind of terrible, but 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, no finals, and 20. And then it weirdly would keep going. I don't know if we count it or not. We'd have to like have a whole discussion about whether this counts.
Sometimes people say you're losing your fastball, and I'm like, then you just proved that you haven't. You're still painting the corners, man.
I got to say, I did get a couple emails from people asking if the streak would count, so I can't take credit for that one.
Okay, but that's really good. I don't think about that stuff. That's funny. Like those kinds of things, like, hey, what about this? I'm like, oh, that's right. I guess that would be it. Maybe Van Gundy would be right, because when Van Gundy, who I love, was doing the early Warriors games, going, they're going to win the next 7 titles. They're going to be in the finals the next 10 years, and that whole thing. I'm like, dude, come on. Like, you've been around sports your whole life. Like, this stuff always ends sooner than everybody thinks it is. And
do you have any more what ifs?
One more. Does this put Tatum's career MVPs at the under 5 now?
Because he would have won this year.
I'm kidding.
I do think this was a bad break for the Celtics, because I just think odds are Philly is going to be more imposing next year. And the whole Milwaukee with Giannis in a contract year, that they scare me too. And I just thought they were in a really good position in the East. If they just were able to get everybody together and healthy at the same time, I really think they could have done some damage.
How about Gordon Hayward's run? Immediately hurt for the season, come back this really odd year where it just isn't clicking, even though everybody's saying you're healthy and you just aren't the same. You come back, you look like an all-star, may have made the all-star team this year had he not been hurt again. Comes back, is kind of up, kind of down. I know the numbers look a little better, but I think there's some really, watching him in person in both those Utah games when he was at Salt Lake, it was like, what is going on here? And then if this were to happen, cancel season, he'd be going into the 4th year of this deal with all Boston fans still going, what is he? Like, what is this guy? So
the only arc that would have been weirder was Chris Sale. Chris Sale comes in, Cy Young, basically runs out of gas. Then the next year they win the World Series. He runs out of gas, but then kind of comes up big in the Dodger series. Then the next year, hurt. Now Tommy John.
extension before what, or like what, while he was hurt?
Yeah, we'll never get the answer for that.